I saw her on a TV show, and I had never seen her before, and I said, that's it.
For decades, Robert Redford was the embodiment of calm in chaos, the gentleman of New Hollywood. While others exploded, faded, or flamed out, Redford stayed grounded, golden, and above the fray. He didn't chase headlines, he didn't trade in gossip, and he never aired dirty laundry, until now. At 88, the Oscar-winning icon finally said what those closest to him have known for years. There were actors who made the work unbearable, men he clashed with behind closed doors, legends he couldn't stand. And while the performances were iconic, the experiences were anything but. These aren't rumors. These are names, and some will break your heart. Because by the time you reach the final name on Redford's list, you might never watch one of Hollywood's most beloved classics the same way again. Gene Hackman. They shared the screen in Downhill Racer and circled other projects over the years, but Redford and Hackman were never friends and never wanted to be. Hackman, a powerhouse of raw intensity, often clashed with Redford's composed, controlled style. On set, Hackman was known to explode in rehearsals, challenge direction, and disregard subtlety in favor of brute force. Redford found it exhausting. "He's one of the greats," Redford once admitted to a colleague. But he never cared who he steamrolled to get there. What began as mutual respect in the 1970s quickly turned into guarded distance. Redford admired Hackman's work ethic. Nobody could accuse him of laziness, but he found the methods unbearable. Hackman approached each role like a battlefield. He didn't just act, he dominated. Directors were often caught in the crossfire, and co-stars became collateral damage. Redford, who preferred collaboration and quiet discipline, found Hackman's volatility disruptive. "You never knew which Hackman you'd get," one assistant director said of Downhill Racer. "Brilliant or belligerent." There were small flare-ups throughout the shoot, but one moment cemented their fracture. During a crucial scene that relied on subtle emotion, Hackman was reportedly furious over a lighting setup he felt was unflattering. He refused to leave his trailer, delaying production for nearly an hour. The director attempted to intervene, to no avail. Redford finally walked to Hackman's trailer himself, opened the door, and, in front of crew, told him, "This isn't your f***ing movie, Gene. It's a team effort. Show up or step aside." Hackman showed up, but the two never spoke off camera again. In private, Redford would refer to Hackman as a sledgehammer in a violin shop. It wasn't a question of talent. Redford never denied Hackman's greatness. It was about control, temperament, and basic respect. Redford, who had begun quietly producing and directing by the late 70s, reportedly vetoed Hackman's name on more than one casting list. "Not worth it," he'd write in the margins. "Brilliant actor. Impossible human." Their careers continued to parallel each other through the decades. Both Oscar winners, both icons of the New Hollywood era, but they never shared the screen again. When asked years later if he regretted not working with Hackman more, Redford paused and gave a diplomatic smile. "Some pairings," he said, "only need to happen once." He left it at that. "He's one of the greats," Redford once admitted to a colleague, but he never cared who he steamrolled to get there. James Woods. Their political and personal philosophies couldn't have been more different. And while they never shared a full film, Woods auditioned for supporting roles in Redford-led projects more than once, and was consistently rejected. Redford later revealed he found Woods deeply unsettling and intensely difficult to even sit in a room with. One casting session ended with Redford reportedly walking out after Woods challenged him on Vietnam policy, during a read for a courtroom drama. "He brought chaos to places that needed quiet," Redford said later. "I wasn't interested in managing that energy." It wasn't just a matter of politics, though that certainly didn't help. Redford, measured, principled, and understated, found Woods's confrontational style exhausting. Woods prided himself on being the smartest guy in the room, but Redford didn't care for games of intellectual one-upmanship. "He never wanted to understand the story," Redford reportedly said of their earliest meeting. He wanted to dominate it. The two men existed on opposite ends of the creative spectrum. Redford thrived in quiet intensity, character nuance, emotional layering. Woods, by contrast, exploded into rooms with kinetic force. Sharp, wired, often unpredictable. "He could give you brilliance," one casting director said, "but you had to survive the storm first." Redford wasn't willing to take that chance. The clash became folklore among casting directors. One particularly tense encounter happened in the late 80s during pre-production for a legal thriller Redford was developing. Woods came in for a supporting role and launched into the scene with razor-sharp precision, only to break character halfway through to debate a line's political implication. What began as an acting exercise quickly devolved into a lecture on Cold War foreign policy. Redford listened for less than 2 minutes before closing the script and leaving the room. "If I wanted a debate," he said afterward, "I'd go back to college." Even years later, Woods continued to needle Redford in interviews and private industry panels. While never naming him directly, Woods would occasionally reference Hollywood hypocrites who preach peace but run studios like generals. Insiders who knew the history saw through the coded language. Redford, for his part, refused to respond publicly. But the blacklisting was silent and absolute. His casting notes reportedly included a single blunt phrase next to Woods's name: "Never, ever." Woods's undeniable talent made him a favorite for edgy, unpredictable roles, but Redford wanted none of it. "There's a difference between tension and toxicity," he once said. He never understood that line. The opportunities evaporated. The phone never rang again. And even as Woods's career shifted more toward controversy than craft, Redford stayed silent, except for the occasional sharp comment in private rooms. "He brought chaos to places that needed quiet," Redford said later. "I wasn't interested in managing that energy." Dustin Hoffman. All the President's Men may have immortalized them as one of cinema's most iconic duos, but Redford was always quietly frustrated by Hoffman's approach. Hoffman improvised frequently, challenged scripts, and had a habit of changing blocking mid-scene. Redford, a director's actor with laser focus, hated the unpredictability. He felt Hoffman tried to dominate the camera with little regard for collaboration. They were never openly hostile, but when asked why they never worked together again, Redford simply said, "Once was enough." From the outside, it was magic. Two of the biggest stars of the 1970s portraying real-life journalists unraveling the biggest political scandal in American history. But behind the scenes, it was a slow, grinding clash of two very different artistic philosophies. Redford came to set prepared, meticulous, and dialed in. Hoffman preferred spontaneity, sometimes altering his delivery on the fly, throwing off rhythm and energy that Redford had spent hours shaping. Crew members described the atmosphere as quietly tense. Not explosive, not dramatic, just uneasy. Hoffman would rehearse a scene one way and shoot it another. He would subtly reposition himself during takes to shift the visual focus, often stepping into Redford's light. At first, Redford tried to shrug it off as part of the creative process, but as production wore on, the interruptions began to wear him down. There was one scene, a phone call sequence in the newsroom, where Hoffman reportedly did 7 takes, each with a different tone, pacing, and set of unscripted lines. Redford, who had to react off those unpredictable changes, was said to be seething by the end. Director Alan J. Pakula walked the line delicately, never letting the tension boil over, but everyone on set could feel it. "You could tell Bob was biting his tongue," one lighting tech recalled. Every single day behind closed doors, Redford voiced concerns about losing narrative cohesion. "We're trying to tell a story," he was overheard saying to Pakula during a break, "not chase 1,000 little moments." Still, the director kept both stars in orbit. Barely. Knowing the result would be unforgettable, even if the process was fragile. Redford, who would go on to direct his own critically acclaimed films, valued precision. efficiency, discipline. To him, acting was a team sport, and Hoffman often felt like a player trying to win alone. Redford never spoke publicly against Hoffman, but when retrospectives and reunion panels were pitched years later, he declined them all. There was no falling out, no scandal, just a mutual unspoken agreement. Never again. Some people just don't click, even if the film is a masterpiece. They were never openly hostile, but when asked why they never worked together again, Redford simply said, "Once was enough." Tom Cruise. Their only collaboration, Lions for Lambs, was a disaster behind the scenes. Redford, who directed the film, struggled to get past Cruise's corporate mindset. Every note was about optics, Redford later said, not emotion, not honesty, just brand. Cruise reportedly pushed for scene changes, shot angles, even last-minute rewrites. The film flopped, and Redford walked away from the experience, calling it one of the most frustrating projects of my career. He never spoke to Cruise again. When the project was first pitched, it seemed like a dream pairing. Redford, the elder statesman of thoughtful American cinema, and Cruise, the blockbuster juggernaut trying to pivot toward serious material. But from the beginning, the chemistry was off. Redford envisioned a stripped-down political drama, understated, cerebral, and timely. Cruise came in talking about lighting, camera angles, wardrobe, and global messaging. It wasn't collaboration, it was collision. Insiders say the tension was immediate. Cruise, also a producer on the film, wanted final say on nearly everything, from poster design to pacing in the edit. He reportedly arrived at production meetings flanked by a team of publicists and image consultants, and often used words like market positioning and viewer perception in place of more typical actor-director language. Redford, a man who once spent 3 days rehearsing a silent scene for ordinary people, was appalled. Even the rehearsal process exposed the rift. Cruise requested stylists on standby during blocking sessions, reportedly because he wanted his physical silhouette to communicate discipline. Redford, stunned, remarked later, "I wanted the scene to show vulnerability. He wanted it to show symmetry." The two couldn't agree on what the film was even about. Redford saw it as a cautionary tale about institutional failure. Cruise viewed it as a redemption arc for a charismatic leader. On set, the energy only grew more strained. Cruise would often stop mid-scene to request a lighting adjustment or to suggest a punchier line that wasn't in the script. Redford, patient to a fault, tried to accommodate at first, but by week 3, he was openly frustrated. One assistant on the film described a moment during a take when Redford leaned in and quietly asked, "Are we acting? Or are we selling a campaign ad?" Even in post-production, Cruise's fingerprints were everywhere. He reportedly requested multiple cuts of his scenes, arguing about the exact length of a reaction shot. Redford gave him rope, until the studio intervened and sided with Cruise. That was the final straw. Redford delivered the film he could, washed his hands of it, and skipped nearly all of the press. The movie opened to lukewarm reviews and underwhelming box office numbers. Cruise moved on. Redford went silent. The experience left a mark, not just as a creative failure, but as a philosophical breakdown. One man trying to say something, the other trying to sell something. He never spoke to Cruise again. Faye Dunaway. 3 Days of the Condor was a critical hit, but off-screen, it was cold. Redford and Dunaway reportedly had no chemistry during filming, and insiders say the tension was visible between takes. Dunaway, known for her demanding nature and perfectionism, frequently clashed with the director, and Redford often found himself caught in the crossfire. "She wasn't difficult because she cared," one crew member said. "She was difficult because she didn't trust anyone, not even him." Redford called her a storm in heels. From the outset, the pairing looked promising. Redford was at the height of his powers, box office gold with a reputation for calm professionalism. Dunaway had just come off Chinatown and was widely regarded as one of the most compelling actresses of her generation. But their working styles couldn't have been more different. Redford valued subtlety, economy, and restraint. Dunaway arrived on set each day like she was preparing for war, fiercely protective of her process and unafraid to challenge anyone, including the director or her co-star. She would frequently ask to review dailies, request rewrites of lines the night before filming, and was known to demand changes to lighting setups that had already been approved. Redford, who believed in trusting the team and preserving momentum, began to see the production as less of a creative space and more of a daily negotiation. According to one script supervisor, Redford once said during a break, "We're here to find truth, not micromanage every syllable into submission." Their scenes together were tight, moody, charged, but that tension wasn't acting. It was barely contained frustration. Dunaway would ask for multiple takes of a single line, adjusting the inflection down to the syllable. Redford, who preferred to trust instinct and move forward, grew increasingly irritated. He once reportedly muttered, "We're not building a watch here," as she requested a fourth reset during a relatively minor scene. One day, the tension bubbled over during a closed-door meeting with director Sidney Pollack. Dunaway had questioned the emotional logic of her character in a key scene. Redford, sitting silently at first, finally snapped, "It's espionage, Faye, not Chekhov." The room went quiet. She walked out. The next day, she returned as if nothing had happened, but the mood never recovered. Despite the on-screen intimacy required by the script, there was nothing warm about their dynamic. Redford reportedly requested a body double be used for insert shots after Dunaway rapped. When asked about her in a press interview years later, he paused, smiled thinly, and said, "She's unforgettable." No collaborations followed, no reunion panels, no nostalgic interviews about the making of the film. "She wasn't difficult because she cared," one crew member said. "She was difficult because she didn't trust anyone, not even him." Redford called her a storm in heels. Robert Duvall. Though they both starred in The Natural, Redford and Duvall were like oil and water. Duvall's improvisational, instinct-first approach clashed with Redford's structured precision. Redford reportedly asked Duvall to stick to the script during a pivotal scene, and Duvall flatly refused. What followed was a behind-the-scenes shouting match that crew members still talk about. "Duvall wanted to play jazz," Redford said later. "I wanted to play composition. It wasn't music, it was noise." From day one on set, their differences were obvious. Redford approached the film like a symphony, rehearsed, timed, emotionally calibrated. He had spent weeks preparing for the role of Roy Hobbs, fine-tuning every detail down to body language and breath. Duvall, meanwhile, showed up with no notes, no rehearsal plans, and a firm belief that real acting came from the gut, not the page. At first, Redford admired the rawness. Duvall's portrayal of cynical sportswriter Max Mercy was electric, unpredictable, and deeply lived in. But as the shoot wore on, that same unpredictability became a liability. Duvall would rewrite lines in the makeup chair, shift the rhythm of a scene without warning, or deliver a completely different emotional tone from take to take. Redford, known for his patience, began to lose it. Their differences weren't just stylistic, they were personal. Redford was quiet, measured, deliberate. Duvall was explosive, volatile, almost gleefully chaotic. On the set of The Natural, that contrast created an undercurrent of friction that never quite boiled over, but never cooled either. "They were both brilliant," said one crew member, "but they weren't making the same movie." The breaking point came during a crucial confrontation scene. Redford wanted to hit a specific emotional beat, one that tied directly into a larger arc he and director Barry Levinson had carefully constructed. Duvall, uninterested in any arc that wasn't his own, kept undercutting the tension with sarcastic ad-libs. Redford stopped the take, turned to Duvall and said, "It's not your movie." Duvall fired back, "It's not anyone's until it's real." They argued for 15 minutes while the cameras rolled in silence. Crew members backed away. One sound technician later said, It was like watching a campfire turn into a forest fire. Levinson eventually stepped in to mediate, and the scene was completed. Barely. After the shoot, Redford was asked about working with Duvall. His response was clipped. "He's brilliant, but I don't need to go through that again." Duvall never responded publicly, but the two were never in the same room again, even during press tours. There's a reason no second collaboration ever materialized, not because of lack of opportunity, but because neither man had forgotten the flameout. Duvall wanted to play jazz, Redford said later. "I wanted to play composition. It wasn't music, it was noise." Paul Newman. It's the name no one expected. The man most associated with Redford, the partner in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting, the other half of the myth. But according to Redford, the relationship wasn't what it seemed. "He was charming," Redford said, "but he always kept a distance. And sometimes he played dumb to get away with more than he should have." There was no dramatic feud, just the slow erosion of trust. When Newman began taking more producer control on The Sting, Redford felt the shift. "He stopped being my co-star and started being my competition," he once confided. The friendship never fully broke, but it faded into polite distance. From the outside, they were lightning in a bottle. The perfect contrast. Newman was all cool blue charisma and effortless magnetism. Redford, the quiet storm, thoughtful and composed. Together, they changed what a movie star could be. Funny, self-aware, dangerously charming. But beneath the surface, Redford always sensed something guarded in Newman, a wall he could never quite scale. Their dynamic on Butch Cassidy was warm, easy, built on laughs and long days in the desert. But by the time they reunited for The Sting, something had shifted. Newman had more clout. He arrived to meetings flanked by studio execs, often with notes on scripts, casting, even camera placement. Redford, still more interested in the art than the politics, felt himself pushed to the sidelines. "It stopped being two guys making a movie," one crew member later said. "It became a chess match between stars." Redford kept his frustration mostly private, but those close to him saw the toll. He admired Newman deeply, but he also resented the way the public treated Newman as the soul of their partnership. In interviews, journalists would direct questions to Newman first. Headlines would lean on Newman's name. "Paul was the face," Redford once said, "and I was the footnote." The years that followed brought cordial interactions, tributes, the occasional shared appearance. But they never made another film together. Offers came, scripts were floated, but nothing ever landed. When asked why, Redford would always say, "Timing wasn't right." But those who knew the truth understood. Timing wasn't the problem. Trust was. There was no rift, no betrayal. Just two icons quietly drifting apart, one silent mile at a time. "He was charming," Redford said, "but he always kept a distance. And sometimes he played dumb to get away with more than he should have." There was no dramatic feud, just the slow erosion of trust. When Newman began taking more producer control on The Sting, Redford felt the shift. "He stopped being my co-star and started being my competition," he once confided. The friendship never fully broke, but it faded into polite distance. Some of these names will hurt. Others will feel inevitable. But together,